In part 2 of this lecture, we will learn about some of the consequences of job stress. Job strains are the consequences of stress, the outcomes of experiencing stress. We can divide these different strains into 3 different categories: behavioral strains, psychological strains, and physiological strains. Behavioral strains include things that are more observable, things that we can count or measure easily, things like absenteeism and turnover, violence, accident rates. Behavioral strains also include impairments in information processing, things like reduced memory, reduced reaction time, reduced accuracy. Psychological strains include outcomes that are not easily seen, not easily observed. Things like anxiety, depression, problems with sleeping. The individual may be able to recognize these things internally, but it's difficult for anyone else to understand what this person is experiencing. That's why psychological strains are so important for training programs. We need to help people identify some of the early warning signs of chronic stress, of chronic strain, and help them make the necessary changes before it turns into things like heart disease, stroke, arthritis, and high blood pressure, some of the physiological strains. Look at all the different things that we might experience as a result of job stress, and especially as a result of chronic job stress. Stress can change our behaviors, it can change our psychology, our well-being, and it can change our bodies. It can actually destroy the heart muscle and lead to heart disease. If we think about stress as a form of arousal, many studies find that it has a curvilinear relationship with job performance. What this means is that moderate levels of stress are good for performance. When we experience at least some arousal, some stimulation from our work environment, we tend to perform better than when there is no stress or when there are high levels of stress. This shouldn't be a surprise to many of us who don't like working in boring jobs where there is nothing to do and we just sit. Many of us don't like working in jobs where we are under constant high levels of stress. Psychological burnout is a very serious psychological strain that we sometimes experience as a result of chronic job stress. Burnout technically is an extreme state of strain that results from prolonged exposure to job stress. And there are 3 components of burnout: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and low accomplishment. When it comes to emotional exhaustion, many people who are suffering from burnout cannot process emotions at that time. They have had it when it comes to experiencing life. Some people can't feel emotions. They are numb to the emotions that they normally would feel if they weren't experiencing burnout. When it comes to depersonalization, some people who experience burnout treat others in a not so nice way. And it's not because they're bad people. It's not because they're mean people. It's partly because of the burnout, because it is suppressing their emotions. It's affecting their perceptions. It's affecting their physiological responses to the environment. So don't take it personally that the person who is suffering from burnout isn't very nice right now. It probably has a lot to do with what they're experiencing internally. Low personal accomplishment. People who suffer from burnout find it really difficult to get their work done. Again, they've just had it. They don't want to open the laptop. They don't want to go to work. They don't want to fill out another report. They don't want to do anything. Not because they're lazy, but because they're experiencing burnout. There are 2 important risk factors that researchers have identified: perceptions of injustice and lack of social support. When these 2 factors are present, and when they're present together, we should be more concerned about that individual potentially suffering from burnout. We should also pay attention to individual differences, things like perceived control, and whether the individual has any of the qualities that we're going to cover on the next few slides. The physiological consequences of stress are underestimated. Chronic stress especially can have a negative impact on our cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, and biochemical systems. Our sympathetic nervous system produces the stress hormones we need to cope with stress. Overactivation of this particular system can lead to significant wear and tear on our organs. This is one of the reasons why we see things like heart disease and high blood pressure in type A personalities as they age.